You've probably heard your whole life that you have five senses, right? Taste, smell, touch, hearing, and sight. But what if I told you that's not even close to the whole story? Turns out that's a massive oversimplification. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on how we actually experience the world around us. So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll challenge that old five senses model. Then, we're going to meet the real heroes of this story, our sensory receptors. We'll see how they're categorized, we'll zoom in on the incredibly complex sense of touch, and finally, we'll follow the path from a simple sensation all the way to a signal inside your brain. Yeah, that classic model of five senses, it's a decent starting point, sure, but it's fundamentally incomplete. It leaves out so many critical ways we interact not just with the world, but with our own bodies. Let's take a look at just a few of the senses that usually get left out. Just look at some of these. Think about it for a second. How do you know you're standing upright right now without even looking? That's your sense of balance. Or how can you tell a stove is hot just by getting near it? That's thermoception. And here's a fun one. Close your eyes and touch your nose. How did you do that? That's proprioception, your brain's internal map of where your body is. These are totally distinct senses. Okay, to really understand all these different senses, we have to get right to the source. We need to meet the gatekeepers of our perception. And they are these tiny microscopic cells called sensory receptors. They are literally the bridge between the outside world and your inner experience. The job of a receptor is incredibly specific. You can think of it like a lock that only opens with one particular key. It's designed to just sit there and wait for its one trigger, whether that's light or pressure or a certain chemical. And the moment it detects it, its job is to translate that physical event into an electrical signal your nervous system can understand. Now, with millions of these receptors all over our bodies, how do scientists even begin to keep track of them all? Well, they basically sort them into three big buckets, by how they're built, where they're located, and what job they do. Let's take a quick look at each one. First, let's talk structure. Some receptors are really simple, just free nerve endings hanging out in your tissue. These are great for sensing things like pain and temperature. Others are a bit more complex. They're encapsulated or wrapped in tissue, which helps them sense things like deep pressure. And then you have the really specialized cells, like the photoreceptors in your eyes, which are like custom-built machines for a single, complex task. Next up is location, and this one is pretty straightforward. You've got exteroceptors, think extero for external, which are your outward-facing sensors. They feel the wind, see the light. Then you have interoceptors, and you guessed it, they're your internal monitors. You're not consciously aware of them, but they're working 24/7, checking things like your blood pressure to make sure everything's running smoothly. Now we get to what I think is the most interesting way to classify these guys, by their function. What is their actual job? What kind of signal are they built to detect? This is where you really start to see how diverse our sensory world is. Let's start with a really important one, nociceptors. These are your body's built-in alarm system. They don't just sense a little heat or a little pressure. No, they specifically kick into action when a stimulus is so intense that it could be damaging, and your brain interprets that signal as one thing, pain. And here is a perfect example of how they work. You know that burning sensation you get from eating a chili pepper? Well, the chemical that makes it spicy, capsaicin, isn't actually burning you. It's just a trick. It perfectly fits into the nociceptors and activates them, sending the exact same danger signal to your brain that a real burn would. That's why spicy food feels hot. All right, next are the mechanoreceptors. These are the specialists of all things physical. They respond to any kind of mechanical force. We're talking light touch, deep pressure, the vibrations from a sound wave, even the stretching of your skin. They're incredibly versatile. Just think about feeling your phone vibrate. That's not just a generic touch sensation, is it? It's a very specific high-frequency buzz. And that's because a particular type of mechanoreceptor is designed just to pick up that exact kind of physical signal. It's amazing how specialized they are. And now for one of the coolest senses of all, sight. This is all made possible by photoreceptors. These are these amazing, highly specialized cells in the back of your eye that have one job, to catch tiny particles of light, photons, and convert their energy into a signal the brain can turn into an image. And what's wild is that even photoreceptors have their own specialties. You have some for seeing color in bright light, and others for seeing in the dark. Your rod cells, for example, are incredibly sensitive to even the smallest amount of light. They're the reason you can still see shapes and not walk into a wall when you get up for a midnight snack. So we've met some of the individual players, but how do they all work together as a team? To see that in action, there is no better example than our sense of touch, or as scientists call it, somatosensation. This quote really hits the nail on the head. Calling touch a single sense is like calling an orchestra a single instrument. It's really a whole collection of different sensations, a symphony really, and each note is played by its own specialist receptor. And this table introduces you to some of the key musicians in that orchestra. You've got Merkel's cells for the superfine details like the feeling of reading Braille. Meissner's corpuscles pick up on that light, fluttery touch like a feather brushing your arm. Pacinian corpuscles handle the deep pressure and that foam buzz we keep talking about. And Ruffini corpuscles tell your brain when your skin is stretching, like when you grip a baseball bat. All of them working together create what you think of as touch. Okay, so a receptor gets triggered. Great, but so what? How does that tiny event in your fingertip actually become a thought or a feeling in your head? Well, that brings us to the final crucial leg of the journey, turning that initial trigger into a signal the brain can actually use. When you boil it all down, the process is actually pretty elegant. It starts with a stimulus from the outside world. That activates a specific receptor. The receptor passes a message to a neuron, and that neuron carries the signal all the way to the brain, where it's finally turned into a perception. Think of the neuron as the high-speed fiber optic cable in this system. A sensory neuron is the physical wire connecting that receptor way out in your skin or your eye, all the way to the central command center, your brain. It takes that on switch flipped by the receptor and sends the message zipping along as a tiny electrical impulse. All right, let's do a quick recap of the big ideas here. First, and most importantly, our sensory experience is way bigger than just 5 senses. Second, our window to that experience is through highly specialized cells called receptors. Third, these receptors are all experts at their one job, whether it's detecting light, pressure, or potential harm. And finally, a single sense like touch is really a complex team of many different receptor types working together. And all of this leaves us with a pretty mind-blowing question to chew on. If every single thing you see, hear, and feel is just your brain's interpretation of signals from these tiny detectors, what else is out there? What entire layers of reality might exist that we simply don't have the right receptors to even notice? Something to think about.